sort of a new series. I have preached on David twice, a whole series on David, but I always stop when he gets kinged. It's like, that's the David and Goliath portion of the story. It's the exciting portion. And we know that some bad things happen when David becomes king. I've always skipped that part, but I thought, let's go finish the story of David. So we're gonna pick up where I usually left off. There's an overlap. Those of you who have been here, I think the last time I preached was in 2022, so some of you probably have heard this. But I want to start there, just so you know where we're going from. So David, of course, when he's probably about 13 years old, we don't know exactly the age, sometime around the time he was 13, he was anointed by Samuel to be the next king of Israel, because God had already determined Saul had turned his heart from him. And so he anointed him, and he told him, you're going to be the next king of Israel. And then from there, David went right back to the sheep field where he came from, where he stayed for a couple years. It's not the way that Hollywood would do it. That would have been the beginning of the journey for him, He'd go to Hogsworth or something to study. But no, that's the way the Bible does it. And by the way, every Hollywood movie that has ever written a thing about the hero's journey is stealing it from David. That's kind of the first. But so David was just in the sheep field, and then he ends up going to deliver food to his brothers on the front line when he meets up with Goliath, fights the most famous battle in history, and he becomes a celebrity overnight. You might call him a social media influencer. He was suddenly there. If he'd had a TikTok channel, it would have blown up. He went viral. People loved him. And so he actually, at a very tender age, probably around 15, 16, was put in charge of a battalion that was the King's Guard, and they were fantastic. I've said before, David, as far as we know, in his entire life, would never lose a battle. Not singly, in single combat, not as the captain of the guard, not as an outlaw with a ragtag band of 30 men, and not as a king. He never loses a battle. So he was phenomenal. And the people loved him, and because of that, Saul became jealous of him and decided he had to kill him to get him out of the way. And David went on the run then for much of his young life, probably his 20s. He was on the run. And Saul literally had a whole detachment of troops whose job was to find David and kill him. There's a couple close misses, and David, was saved by the Lord by forewarning knowledge and things. But after a period of time, in the sad part of it, David loses his nerve. He gets tired. It is wearing him down towards the end. That Saul keeps coming. And no matter how many times David tries to save his life and tell him, I'm not trying to kill you, it doesn't matter. Saul won't give up. And so David loses his nerve, and he does something that you wouldn't think he would ever do. He goes to the Philistine king to ask for sanctuary. He's well known as the Philistine killer, and they had made songs about him in Jerusalem about how he killed 10,000s of them. And so the king knew who he was, but he saw an opportunity. This is someone coming over to my side for a change. And so he gives him a little city to live in called Ziklag, and he and his men, and they have families by this point, all move into there. And, from a standpoint of logic, it works. Saul's not looking for him in Philistine. And so they're there, and the king sends him out on raiding parties because they're slowly encroaching on the land of Israel always. And he actually tries to send him out to encroach on Israel's land. But David's clever. Instead of doing that, he goes somewhere else. And when he takes these villages, when he attacks these villages to take their land, he kills men, women, and children, slaughters the whole village. And then he brings back the spoil and tells the king it was Jews. And so the king thinks, this guy's great. Meanwhile, think about that. David is off killing men, women, and children to keep the lie going. So this was definitely not what God wanted. But then finally, the chapter right before we're starting here, it all comes to a head because instead of just these little skirmishes, the king of Philistine marches out against King Saul, army against army. And he decides to put David and his men in charge of his king's guard. In other words, you're going to guard me, which means David is being called into battle against Israel, the people he's supposed to be the king of one day. And you can see Satan's hand at work here for sure, because this would definitely ruin his chances of ever being king, which Satan definitely wants. He does not want David to become king. And David has no way out of this. Now, it's possible, even probable, depending on how the battle goes, that David's army will never see battle, because the kings stay way in the back in those days. But he's on the battlefield with the Philistines. And then, in an act of mercy from God, God stirs up dissension in the ranks, and the other leaders of the army come to the king and says, why in the world would we put David at our rear? This guy's well known as a Philistine killer. You want to have him in Ziklag, that's fine. I don't want him behind me. What if he decides he's Jew again? And we have one of the most fearsome fighters we've ever known behind us. That's really a bad place to be. And so the king of Philistine calls David up and says, you know what? I personally trust you, but my men don't. We're going to send you home. So in an act of mercy, God gets him off the battlefield. And he goes back to Ziklag, and when he gets there, he discovers while he was away, his village was attacked by Amalekites, and they stole everything, and they took all the women and children as slaves. This is the lowest point in David's life at this point, because not only is he really in a bad place, and he knows because he dodged this bullet, but they don't have bullets in those days. He dodged this arrow, but in the future, he's going to have somehow resolve this, and so he's already worried about that. And he comes home and finds his wives and everybody's wives and kids are taken as slaves, and the men talk about stoning him. Hey, we did not sign up for this. We signed up to put David on the throne. We never signed up to fight for Philistine. Now we're here, and clearly, God is punishing us because our children have been stolen. We should just kill this leader and move on with our lives. So that's a bad place to be as a leader when your men are talking about killing you. And David goes off, and this is the most important verse in the whole story. He went and found strength in the Lord. He withdrew himself, and for the first time that we see in the entire episodes of when he was in the Philistine, he actually turns to God. He starts asking God what he should do instead of just doing what he thought was best. And God tells him, he says, go get them. You'll recover them all. And so he goes out, he tells his men, we're going to go get them. And they did. They went and they fought him. They ambushed them, and not one woman or child was missing. They recovered them all, including all their loot, and they all came back to Ziklag. Nice big victory. Now at this point, David must be feeling, we don't know, because the Bible doesn't tell us, but he must be feeling like, what have I been doing? They almost can see that he's woken up from a bad dream. Like, what have I been doing? This is what I should have always, because before I always asked God what to do, and I stopped, and it got me in this horrible position, and now I'm asking God what to do, and I see I'm blessed again. I think I can see the pattern here, right? And that's where we pick up this story, because now we're going to find out how that battle between Philistine and the king of Israel went. So we're joining his journey already in progress here. David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. Never a good sign, by the way. This is not good. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. Where have you come from? David asked him. He answered, I escaped from the Israelite camp. What happened? David asked. Tell me. The battle turned against the Israelites, and they fled from the battlefield. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are both dead. Now, Jonathan was David's closest friend on earth. He said he was closer than a brother to him. And so Jonathan and Saul are dead. And David said to the young man who brought the report, how do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? He says, well, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, the young man said, and there was Saul, leaning on his spear with chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me and said, I said, what can I do? He asked me, who are you? An Amalekite, I answered. And then he said to me, stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive. So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he'd been so badly wounded, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and I've brought them here to my Lord. Finally, right? Now, remember, David was anointed king back when he was 13. He's now in his late 20s. That's a long time. He spent somewhere around 7 years running for his life, and finally it's over. Now, he had the opportunity on 2 different occasions to kill Saul and take the crown, and he refused. So he's done the right thing, and now finally he's been rewarded because the Philistines did David's dirty work. Because he could never be king as long as Saul was king. That's just not going to happen. You can't have 2 kings, and Saul wasn't backing down, and David wasn't going to take it. There was no way out of this impasse, and this guy was trying to kill David. You must think he's thinking, okay, no one can blame me now. I didn't kill him, but somebody has to take the crown, and I've been anointed. You would think that's where David's going to go. That's where I'd go. Like, okay, God, thank you. Thank you that your will has been done. I thank you for killing the evil king and putting me in his place. Hallelujah. May God's will be done. That's how I do it. Instead, David and all his men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them, and they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. You know, that's not what this little guy thought he was going to see when he brought this news to David. David mourned. David was saddened to hear what had happened. He wasn't glad. He wasn't even thinking about any kind of an opportunity. The heart of God never rejoices over those who have fallen, just so we know. See, the funny thing is that we mourn, maybe this isn't funny, but the natural thing is we mourn when the innocent have fallen. That's something that always makes us upset. Why do bad things happen to good people? That's a common thing. Probably the number one question I get asked by people who don't believe. How can you believe in a God that would let innocent people suffer? And that's something that we always kind of feel when the innocent have fallen. But Saul wasn't innocent. Saul had turned his heart from God, had blasphemed him, and was trying to kill David. Why are we mourning his life? See, it's far worse when a man in wickedness dies. We don't think of it that way. But that's how heaven sees it, because Saul's hope for redemption is now gone. You understand? There's no hope for Saul now. As long as he was living and breathing, he could repent and come back to God. There's no hope now. Now, I don't know if that's the main reason why David wept, but that's certainly a reason. And remember, this is a guy whose heart is after God's, and I think his heart reacts in ways he doesn't even fully comprehend sometimes, because it's after God like that. God's weeping because Saul will never come back. That's how Samuel was weeping when Saul turned away. We're told this in Proverbs, that don't rejoice when your enemy falls. Don't let your heart rejoice when he stumbles. Now that's kind of Christian, but watch how they end it. This is always the Old Testament. Because the Lord may see, be displeased, and turn his wrath away from him. You want to see him keep getting punished. Don't rejoice. Let God do it. A little bit cynical. Don't be agitated by evildoers. Don't envy the wicked, for the evil have no future. The lamp of the wicked will be put out. And that's something we have to understand. You know, the worst part of being evil is you have to live with it. They're living with it day and night. They never get away from it. You know, I've known some people in my life that are kind of mean and nasty, but they're mean and nasty to themselves too. They're just miserable all the days of their life. And those people who pursue it, wickedness. But the thing that we're taught is that none of us deserve redemption. And so therefore we shouldn't be glad when somebody doesn't get it, because we didn't deserve it either. You know, there's that famous there, but for the grace of God go I. And David kind of knows this, and we know he knows it because he wrote it. In Psalm 23, one of the most famous scriptures in the Bible, he knows that he just went through this. In fact, he says, he restores my soul. Right? He restores it. David's soul was in a bad place, but God restored it and leads me into paths of righteousness. I was going to fight against Israel. Can you imagine him having been on the battlefield wearing Philistine armor when Saul and Jonathan were killed by Philistine swords? Can you imagine? But no, God restored him and led him into paths of righteousness. But he also knows that last part there on that verse. Not because he deserved it, for his name's sake. David says he didn't lead me back into paths of righteousness because I'm great. He led me back into paths of righteousness for his name's sake. I don't deserve it either. And that's how he's able to weep for his enemy. because he's able to see past the things, the conflict on earth. He's able to see the conflict in heaven. And don't misunderstand that David doesn't know what he escaped here. And again, like I said, his army would have been in the back. They may have never seen battle. It's possible. But David knows absolutely full well it doesn't matter where on the battle line you stand. What matters is what side are you on. He would have been on the wrong side of that battle. And he knows that. That's why he's so gracious for it. It was only God's grace that kept him from being on the wrong side of that battle. Now, I'm going to stop here for just a second because I think sometimes we are finding ourselves on the wrong side of the battle lines. Because there's battle lines going on right now in this world, right? There's a kingdom of heaven and there's a kingdom of earth. And there are battle lines here. And sometimes we wander across them, maybe sometimes without even knowing it. And we find ourselves in positions sometimes that we don't even remember how we got there. I don't even know how I got here. What am I doing? And sometimes we're there for a long time and our eyes are never opened to the truth. And this is my worst and least favorite part of the sermon because I got to confess something now to you all from my early days. And this is not as early as some of my confessions, so that makes it even worse because this actually happened after Victoria and I were married. But when Victoria first came over from Ukraine, her English was only so-so, and about maybe a 2 on a scale 1 to 5 kind of a thing. And so there's a lot of things we couldn't do as a couple, really. We tried, but it was hard for her to understand other people. She got used to my cadence and my language, so she could understand me pretty well, but she had a very hard time understanding other people talking. So like getting together with people for dinner or something was miserable for her. And so one of the things that we discovered that we could do was anything that didn't require, words, and one of those things was dancing. And Victoria came from a culture where they danced a lot. They would actually have parties in their house, and they would dance. They would clear out the furniture and just dance. And we did that in like the 60s in this country. They have dance parties, but not anymore. So you want to dance in this country, you have to go out. So we would go out dancing. And this is from our days then. And people say, why in the world would you go dancing? I've seen you. You don't move that well. You're probably not that good of a dancer. And I'm not, but I married a smoke show, and she liked going dancing, right? And I liked watching her dance, so that was fine by me. So we would go out, but we discovered that the dance clubs in Dallas, Texas get going at 12 midnight. I am 41 years old in this picture. We don't dance so well during the day. We really don't dance well after midnight, right? And so we were kind of looking at, there were other dance clubs that got together, though, earlier, because they kind of skewed earlier. And so we started going to some of those, but those were known as alternate dance clubs for a reason. There was stuff going on in the corner of those clubs you would not want to know about, right? And that was okay because we weren't doing that, But we were going clubbing. And when I say clubbing, I don't mean like we were, a Benny Goodman tribute band dancing. I mean, we were in clubs, like, what? Why do I not have any music on my... That's weird. That doesn't make any sense at all. Hang on. Why do I not have any music coming out of my speakers here? Let me try this again. I hate when these things happen. You have these moments set up, and then you get it like that. Let me see here. Let me try this. Okay, so that didn't work so well either. Why is this not coming out of my speaker? Aha. Let me give it to you. You got to hear the music to get the club, right? There you go. That's fun. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie that's called Bedazzled, and Satan is trying to get this guy's soul, and she takes him to this dance club. Anyway, that's the kind of dance club we were in. And then we went to these alternate ones, And yeah, there were some things going on there we didn't necessarily want to talk about, but we still went to the club. We still went dancing. And then one day, you pay a two-drink minimum. We pay our two-drink minimum. We go in, we go to the dance floor, we dance. And one day I'm going to the bar to get my two-drink minimum filled, and I hear two people talking. And the guy was saying, yeah, I'm picking up the money and we'll go over to, and he named a spot where he's going. And he goes, oh, I didn't know they owed them too. So, oh, yeah, they owned them, and he named something else. So I just collect all the money on the weekends. The place he named was a massage parlor. And I don't mean a PT therapeutic massage parlor. Right? One of the ones that has the neon sign on the window and darkness all around it. That kind of massage club, a massage place. And the other place he named next to it is euphemistically called an adult bookstore, although there are no books there. There were adults, but there are no books there. And I sat there realizing that the person we were paying money to for our drinks right now was also running a massage parlor and a porn shop. Now, we never went to the massage parlor. We never went to the porn shop, but our money did. That was the part that, as I had my hands there handing out the cash, I'm like, I know where this money's going. And I became deeply convicted about the place we were in, which I shouldn't have needed that for. I should have known better than that to not be there at all. But yeah, if I'm financing a porn shop and a massage parlor, what side of the war am I on? Listen, it's easy to get there, isn't it? It's easy to say, but that's not me. I don't do that. But it's fine. But then we fund the other side's battle. A lot of times where our money goes shows us where our heart is. That's what Jesus says. For where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also. Where was my heart? Where was my money? Where am I spending my time and my talents and my treasure? Which side of the battle am I really on? If I spend my time doing something that's not kingdom related, if I spend my treasure on things that are not kingdom related, even if it seems innocent, where's your money going? Where's your time going? Where's your talent going? Which side of the battle are you on? Okay, I'm done. Back to David's war. So David realized that he had been living wrong, and he had turned his heart back to God, and then something remarkable happens. David took up his lyre and wrote a lament concerning Saul. Do you know this is the first psalm he'll write in 7 years? He didn't write one psalm the entire time he was living in Ziklag. Not one. The song of his heart, which was expressed all the way through his life, went silent when he was in Ziklag. Think about that. Because if that happens in your life, when the thing that has always kind of driven you forward and the lightness of your heart that you know comes from God, when that disappears, you might be in the wrong place. He could not lift up his voice in praise when he was living according to his will and not God's. How could he talk about how great God was when he was not obeying God? But now he does. And he picks up his pen, or I guess he just writes off the top of his head because he was that good. And he writes this thing called the Lament of the Bow, Song of the Bow. And I'm just going to read you part of it. It's really poetic and beautiful. It's a beautiful tribute to Saul and Jonathan. He said, the beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. That's an expression you may have heard. It comes from David. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew. Neither let there be rain upon you, for there is a shield of the mighty has been cast away, he, the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. See, David knows the anointing had saved him many times. But the anointing did not save Saul because he had turned away. Saul and Jonathan were good in their lives, and in their death they were not separated. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and put ornaments of gold upon you. Oh, how are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle. O Jonathan, you were slain on the high places. Oh, how are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. Okay. So he writes this beautiful thing, and he has them all sing it with him. This tribute to Jonathan and to Saul, and they weep, which is all appropriate. But now what? Now what? Well, you would think it's time to go to Jerusalem, right? Time to go, you've done it. You've done everything right now. You're pitch perfect. Good job, David. Now march on Jerusalem and tell everybody the king has come. Instead, he does something really weird. When he's all done weeping and mourning, he goes back to the cave that he had been in when his men wanted to stone him, because he's found his little quiet place. And he inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? God, what do you want me to do? Well, it's clear what he wants him to do, right? Not to David. He says, I'm not making that mistake again. That mistake brought me to Ziklag. I'm not budging from here until I know what God wants me to do. So he goes and says, is there any city I should go to right now in Israel? Do you want me to return to Israel, or should I stay here? God, what do you want me to do? In the midst of what looked like the greatest moment of his life, he said, wait. Let me see here. David was anointed king. Saul's dead. Time to march on Jerusalem, you would think. So what does God say? The Lord says to him, yes, you shall go up. And David says, again, I still don't know where. Where shall I go up? And that's when God says, to Hebron. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Hebron is not in Jerusalem. Not even close. God was telling him to go someplace else. Now he's going back to Israel, but he's not going where he should go. The palace is there. Let's go. Let's go back. Let's go get that. Nope. That's not what he said. Why not Jerusalem? His men might say so. Well, why don't we go to the palace where Saul, was? Why don't we go there? And if they asked that, David's answer is because God said so. I don't know why you send me to Hebron. Makes no sense to me. But God told me to go there. So guess where we're going? We're going there. So David went up there with his wives. I don't know how to pronounce that first one. Ahinoam and Abigail. My favorite wife of his, by the way. She rocks. Also, and David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his household, and they all went and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Now that's much nicer than Ziklag, but it's still no closer to the crown, right? But this is something that David knew that we better get to know. Because a lot of times we're chafing because God is really slow in getting the plan in our lives going, and we want to, get moving a little bit. But as a Christian, there's no better place to be than the center of God's will for our life. That's it. You want to know the secret of happy Christian life? Where does God want me? That's where I am. See, a lot of times we kind of get a sense of what God wants us to do, and we're rushing ahead of God to do it. That's what happened to Moses. That happened to David. We get ahead of God. And then through maturity as Christians, we learn, I really don't do well when I get ahead of God. So maybe I need to back off a little bit. There was a book I've mentioned before called Me, Myself, and Bob, written by a guy named Phil Vischer, which probably means nothing to anybody here. But Phil Vischer in the 90s was at the top of Christendom because he had this show called VeggieTales, which he had created. And it's a fascinating story about how they got there. And he had a vision. His vision was he wanted to be the Christian Walt Disney. He wanted to make Christian movies like Walt Disney made regular movies. And so he was working towards that goal. And VeggieTales rocked. I mean, every Christian family had, if you had kids, you had VeggieTales. And first on VHS, then on DVD. It's like you had to have them. if you were a parent. If you didn't have VeggieTales, you were a bad parent. Right? And Bob was the little tomato, which was his first character he created. Well, he was convinced that he was being blessed because he had the vision from God, and he was trying to accomplish that. That's what this whole book's about. And what happens is he takes the next step. He's got a lot of money coming into the company. He's got people backing him, and he decides to do a full-length feature animation. And so he does. He gambles the entire company on it, puts all the money into it. You know, Disney did the same thing when they did Snow White. So this was going to be his Snow White, right? And so he had this big plans, and it bombed. No one came to see it, hardly. And they lost everything. And he had to declare bankruptcy. He went from being the top of everything to declaring bankruptcy, and all he was doing in his mind was what God told him to do. Where was God? It was baffling. And here's the worst part of the story. I can't even imagine this part. But as part of bankruptcy, you sell everything that has any worth at all. And the one thing that had most worth were his characters, something we know as IP today, intellectual property. Those were still worth money because you can make books and all kinds of things out of them. So as part of the bankruptcy, he had to sell his characters to pay off debt. And he was no longer allowed to make any stories with him on his own. He couldn't make a movie, a television show, or a book. He couldn't make a coloring book using his own characters. He watched other people use his characters, his IP, to make money, but he was destitute with nothing. Imagine what that was like. But they had paid for the building where his studio was all through the year. They had already prepaid it. So now there's nobody in this building, but he still owned it. It was only a couple miles from his house. And he was baffled. He did not know what God was doing. It made no sense to him at all. So every day he went to his office all alone. He sat down in by his desk and opened his Bible, and he started a Bible study. He'd read a chapter of the Bible. And he had a notebook there. And he'd open up the notebook, and he says, God, I don't understand what's going on. Clearly I didn't hear you right. I just want to hear you speak to me. And he'd just sit there, waiting for God to speak to him. If something came to him he thought might be God, he'd jot it down. Or if he had some thought about the scripture he wrote, he'd jot it down. And this went on for a year, well, the rest of the year. And a couple of times, as he was sitting there, he got this weird idea for a story or something. And he'd flip to another part of the book, and he'd just write those down, because he didn't want to lose any good ideas. And that's what he did. As the year was coming to a close, and he still had no word from God what to do, he was telling his wife about it, and she says, well, you have the notebook. He says, I haven't read anything in the notebook. I can't. It's too painful. Because some of it he's just writing about, his lament to the Lord. And she said, well, I'll read it. And she found this section with all these stories, and she says, Phil, what are these? He goes, I don't know, just dumb stories. She says, they're not dumb stories. You have a collection of children's stories here. He says, so what? I don't have the characters. She said, yeah, the stories. Now, they still were well known in Christian circles, so she reached out to some people, and through a bunch of connections, there was a publisher that said, Phil Fisher has written children's stories? Yeah, we'll publish those. And so they called him up. They got excited about it. We're going to do a launch of this. We're going to make sure every Christian bookstore knows. We're going to get you on the radios, the television, because that's before podcasts, and we're going to get the word out. This is going to be great. We've got some MBAs who are going to help you because they're experts in marketing. I want to send them in so we have your input on how we're going to market this new Phil Vischer stuff. He says, okay. So they met in this empty building, and they rolled in a whiteboard, and the guy takes off his first piece of his three-piece suit, so he's in his vest, rolls up the sleeves, how those guys do, and picks up the marker, and he goes to this, says, okay, Phil, first of all, we will make sure we have your buy-in here, so I want you to tell me, where do you want to be 5 years from now? He's standing by the board. And Phil Vischer says, I want to be in the center of God's will. And the guy said, yeah. Okay, but where do you want to be 5 years from now? He says, no, write that down. And he did. He said, now draw a square around it. He says, and that's all I care about. See how that goes? Because he had learned, I get ahead of God, bad things happen. And this is what David had learned too. I want to be in the center of God's will. That's the only place I want to be. The rest of it doesn't matter. If I'm not in the center of God's will, bad things happen. I want to be right there. This is what the Apostle Paul talked about. And a couple of years ago, this was my verse for the year. I don't usually have verses for the year, but this was my verse for the year a couple of years ago. Some of you got tired of hearing it. People of corrupt mind have been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a way to financial gain, but godliness with contentment is great gain. I cannot tell you how that changed my life. Because instead of trying to work on what God wanted me to do, I worked on being content with what God had done. And what I found out about that was when you're content, you become thankful. And when you're thankful, you become content. And a lot of things that troubled me as a human being, as a Christian, as a person who had all these dreams and ideas and everything, just kind of went away. Washed by that cycle of contentment and thanksgiving. Thanksgiving and contentment. And suddenly I didn't care anymore. Because all I care about is I need to work on my godliness more than anything. I need to work on me being more godly, being more close to God. That's what I need to worry about. If I can get there, I'll be all right. This is the heart of God, right? So anyway, the men of Judah come, and they're the anointed king over the house of Judah. So there's 12 tribes. He's now the king over one of them. Yay. And they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh and Gilead were the ones who buried Saul. And so he sent messages to them saying, you're blessed of the Lord. You've shown this kindness to the Lord, and because you buried him. You didn't let him just sit there and be eaten by vultures. And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you, because I'm going to repay you this kindness. Because you did this thing, you need to know that your hands will be strengthened and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead. But the house of Judah, that I'm now the king over, we're going to repay you for all you've done. You did the right thing, and we're going to repay you. See, living with the God who loves is what he's doing now. The very first thing he does as king is what? Reaches out to somebody else and says, I'm going to repay you for your kindness. My first act as king is not to raise taxes, not to start a better army. My first act as king of Judah, a very small portion of the overall thing, is I'm going to reach out to somebody who showed kindness and show kindness to them. This is the heart. This is the heart that's living him now. He's starting to see things differently. You can tell he's moving differently now. The David of old would have marched in with a parade. This is a different David because he's been through Ziklag now. See, love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always preserves. He's saying, this is my job now as king, right? I'm not going to delight in evil. I'm going to rejoice in truth. I'm going to protect. I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm going to always have hope. I'm always going to persevere. I'm going to move forward as this king. This is my new king. Okay. Now, meanwhile, the rest of Israel is in turmoil. The anointed king of God is in Judah right now, but no one else cares. Because to them, it's an earthly kingdom and it's a struggle between earthly kings. Everybody rises up and pretends to be king. David doesn't participate in any of it. They're fighting amongst each other. David's like, nope. When I am ready to be king of Israel, God will make me king of Israel. So finally, Abner, who had been Saul's right-hand man and had taken Saul's son and tried to make king out of him, and that didn't work well, finally gives up. He says, you know what? In time past, you were seeking for David to be king over all of you. Do you remember that? Remember when we'd sing about how he had killed his 10,000s and everybody wanted David? Well, guess what? He's available. He is now a free agent. So do it. The Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. It's like he just now remembered this prophecy because the thing he tried didn't work out. You know what? I'm tired of fighting this. I think David's the guy. And he goes and he tells everybody else, I think David's the guy. I think we should stop fighting. I think we should just let David be the guy. And so David also spoke this in the hearing of Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin was the tribe that Saul was from. He said, you need to stop trying to keep all this kingship. And Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron. And David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, I'm going to arise and go. I'm going to gather all Israelites to you, my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. And then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Oh, they just remember that you're Jewish and we're Jewish. In times past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. You were the one leading the battles. We kind of forgot all that. Isn't it funny how sometimes that happens? So the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people and be ruler over all of Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David was made covenant with them at Hebron for the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign. 17 years had passed. Hey, for those of you who like numbers, this is interesting. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 33 years. You like numbers? Jesus began his ministry at age 30, and he died on a cross at the age of 33. I don't know, these are kind of interesting how those work out. By the way, 30 was also when Joseph became the head of the entire Egypt. 30 is the year that a Levite is allowed to serve in the temple. I don't know why God figures people under 30 don't know anything, but until you're 30, he doesn't put you in charge. So this was significant. This is why Jesus didn't start his ministry until age 30. This is prescribed by God. Okay, but it took David 17 years from the moment he was anointed to the moment he became king. That's a long time to wait for what God promised you was going to happen. But that's okay, because in the journey, David learned something really important. And this is summed up in Proverbs 30. It says, 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. This is a parallel sentence, by the way. Falsehood and lies means that falsehood is poverty and lies are riches. Keep them both from me. Because I know that if I get too rich or too poor, I'm going to do stupid things. He goes on to say that. He says, if I have too much, I'm going to say, who's God? I don't need God. I've got a 401k. I'm good. Or I might become so poor I end up stealing because I can't wait for God. I'm hungry. I'm going to take. And I'll dishonor the name of my Lord. See, that's what David has learned too. He says, I'm tired of this. I'm going to get right in the middle. I'm going to be content with what God gives me. And I'm going to say, I don't want a lot. I just want to be with you, Lord. That's all I want. And whatever you want to do with my life, you said you want to make me king? Okay, whenever you say. 17 years, though. 17 years. I was a young man once. I remember what it was like to be 17. I thought I could do anything. At age 17, you feel immortal. Fall off the roof of the house and get the next day and go, hurt a little bit, and you just keep going. You know, it's great. What a great time to be alive. But I was young and arrogant and prideful and all those things. I can't imagine waiting 17 years. Here's what you need to know. This is a really important thing. I've said it before. I'm going to put it in print now so you all believe it. Because, when it's in print, it's believable. You need to know this. If God has a plan for your life, that you feel God has a plan for your life, and you think he's just taken way too long, the infinite God is never out of time.